years, in some cases since the end of the Cold War, actually finally come into fruition here at this summit. Bill, the point is that we've got world leaders who have just announced that, in fact, this is a commitment that they're making. I believe they take their commitments very seriously. If what you're asking is do we have a international one world law enforcement mechanism, we don't. We never have. Right? So in all of our efforts internationally, in every treaty that we sign, we're relying on goodwill on the part of those who are signatories to those efforts. That's the nature of international relations. Jake Tapper, ABC.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said today that pressure and sanctions, speaking of Iran's nuclear program, pressure and sanctions cannot fundamentally solve the problem. I was wondering if you could clarify exactly what you believe President Hu Jintao has agreed to, whether you think there actually will be economic sanctions with teeth that the Chinese will sign off on, and what you have told the Chinese in terms of their concern about how much fuel they get from Iran, what the U.S. can help them with in that regard. Thank you, sir.
Here's what I know. The Chinese have sent official representatives to negotiations in New York to begin the process of drafting a sanctions resolution. That is part of the P5+1 effort, and the United States is not moving this process alone. We've got the participation of the Russians, as well as the other members of the P5+1, all of whom believe that it is important for us to send a strong signal to Iran that their consistent violation of United Nations Security Council resolutions, as well as their obligations under the NPT, have consequences, and that they've got a better path to take. Now, you're exactly right, Jake, that the Chinese are obviously concerned about what ramifications this might have on the economy generally. Iran is an oil-producing state. I think that a lot of countries around the world have trade relationships with Iran, and we're mindful of that. But what I said to President Hu and what I've said to every world leader that I talk to is that words have to mean something. There have to be some consequences. And if we are saying that the NPT is important, if we're saying that nonproliferation is important, then when those obligations are repeatedly flouted, that it's important for the international community to come together. And what I would say is that if you consider where we were, say, a year ago with respect to the prospect of sanctions, the fact that we've got Russia and China, as well as the other P5+1 members, having a serious discussion around a sanctions regime, following up on a serious sanctions regime that was passed when North Korea flouted its obligations towards the NPT. It's a sign of the degree to which international diplomacy is making it more possible for us to isolate those countries that are breaking their international obligations. And as I said, I think several weeks ago, my interest is not having a long, drawn-out process for months. I want to see us move forward boldly and quickly to send the kind of message that will allow Iran to make a different calculation. And keep in mind, I have said repeatedly that under the NPT, Iran has the right to develop peaceful civilian nuclear energy, as do all signatories to the NPT. But given the repeated violations that we've seen on the part of Iran, I think understandably the world community questions their commitment towards a peaceful civilian energy program. They have a way of restoring that trust. For example, we put before them, I'm saying the P5+1 now, as well as the IAA, put before them a very reasonable approach that would have allowed them to continue their civilian peaceful nuclear energy needs, but would have allayed many of the concerns around their nuclear weapons program. They have rejected that so far. And that's why it's important, and I said from the start that we're going to move on a dual track. And part of that dual track is making sure that a sanctions regime is in place. Last point I'll make about sanctions. Sometimes I hear the argument that, well, sanctions aren't really going to necessarily work. Sanctions aren't a magic wand. What sanctions do accomplish is hopefully to change the calculus of a country like Iran so that they see that there are more costs and fewer benefits to pursuing a nuclear weapons program. And in that process, what we hope is that if those costs get high enough and the benefits are low enough, that at time they make the right decision, not just for the security and prosperity of the world, but also for their own people. All right. Scott Wilson, Washington Post. Where's Scott? There we go.
Thank you, Mr. President. You have spoken often about the need to bring U.S. policy in line with its treaty obligations internationally to eliminate the perception of hypocrisy that some of the world sees toward the United States and its allies. In that spirit and in that venue, will you call on Israel to declare its nuclear program and sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty? And if not, why wouldn't other countries see that as an incentive not to sign on to the treaty that you say is important to strengthen?
Well, Scott, initially you were talking about U.S. behavior, and then suddenly we were talking about Israel. Let me talk about the United States. I do think that as part of the NPT, our obligation as the largest nuclear power in the world is to take steps to reducing our nuclear stockpile. And that's what the START Treaty was about, sending a message that we are going to meet our obligations. And as far as Israel goes, I'm not going to comment on their program. What I'm going to point to is the fact that consistently we have urged all countries to become members of the NPT. So there's no contradiction there. We think it is important that we have an international approach that is universal and that rests on three pillars, that those of us who have nuclear weapons are making serious efforts to reduce those stockpiles, that we all are working against the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and those countries that don't currently have nuclear weapons make the decision not to pursue nuclear weapons, and that all countries have access to peaceful nuclear energy. And so whether we're talking about Israel or any other country, we think that becoming part of the NPT is important. And that, by the way, is not a new position. That's been a consistent position of the United States government even prior to my administration. Let me call on Stephen Collison of AFP.
Thank you, Mr. President. In your meeting with President Hu, did he give you any indication he would heed your call for a more market-oriented exchange rate for the yuan? If there's going to be a change, when would you envisage that taking place? And what happened in the last few weeks to help you move on from a period of, quite a stormy period of public disagreements with China?
You know, the fact is actually that the relationship between my administration and the Chinese government has been very productive during the course of the last year and a half. We started off working together at various multilateral fora. The first one in London with the G20. I then, out of the bilateral meetings that we had, worked with President Hu to set up a strategic and economic dialogue that looks at a whole range of areas in which the United States and China can cooperate. I made a visit to China that both of us considered very successful. Now, there are some areas where we've got disagreement, and those disagreements are not new. And I have to say that the amount of turbulence, as you put it, that occurred was actually relatively modest when you look at the overall trajectory of U.S.-China relations. I mean, at no point was there ever a suggestion that it's not in the interest of both our countries to cooperate, and that we have not only important bilateral business to do, but also we are